We continue with chapter 8 of the Picture of Dorian Gray, and it is the next day now. So the previous night was when Sibyl acted terribly on stage, and then Dorian broke up with her, and then when he got home in the early hours of the morning, he realized that the painting had changed and the mouth had altered, and he put a big screen in front of the painting. And then we see on page 109 of chapter 8 that it was long past noon. So it was in the afternoon, so Dorian had slept right through the morning. Now you would think that if you had experienced what you had experienced the night before, with Dorian breaking up with your fiancée and your friends leaving because they were bored and all of that, you would have trouble sleeping, you would be very disturbed. But Dorian slept fine, no problem. It talks about his valet Victor. It was like his butler came into the room with a cup of tea and a pile of letters, and one of those letters is from Lord Henry, but unfortunately Dorian doesn't read it. And then there's a lot of descriptions about the room, all aestheticism, and how much Dorian is living in luxury as part of the upper class aristocracy. He's very, very wealthy, which is great for him because he doesn't work though, so he's got nothing to do all day, so no wonder he gets up to nonsense. But he's got all this wealth, and it talks about a lovely toilet set, and it talks about the beautiful china and the curtains and all that. Cashmere wool from cashmere goats and blah blah blah. I put on a dressing down. So Dorian eventually gets up out of bed. Page 110. It was an exquisite day, and you think to yourself, well, first of all, it's not really an exquisite day because somebody, i.e. Sibyl Vane, has killed herself, and the papers are full of that this actress has died. And also, how can it be an exquisite day? Should you not feel some guilt after what you said to Sibyl last night? And also the fact that last night you were engaged to get married, and now suddenly you don't even have a fiancé. So how is it exquisite? But that shows us how unaffected Dorian is, and he felt perfectly happy. Well, it's ironic because how could he, you would expect him to be devastated and disturbed by what had happened the night before, but clearly not. Had the portrait really changed, or had it been simply his own imagination? He wonders if he just imagined it last night. It must be understood that, yes, Dorian Gray has been affected negatively by Lord Henry mostly, but also by Basil, teaching him to be vain and self-centered and in love with his appearance and all that. And Lord Henry, living life to the fullest and chasing all sensations and experiencing a new hedonism, for love for pleasure and all that. But Dorian Gray as a character himself, without any outside influence, so before he meets Basil and Lord Henry, we can argue and say that he's not a very nice man, because you would not act the way he acts if that was not your moral compass or how you had been brought up. Yes, he didn't have any parents. Yes, he lived with his grandfather, who was not a very loving man probably, and didn't treat Dorian very well. But the fact of the matter is that no one is going to go backstage and talk to their fiancé like that, and without having that instilled in them, that as part of their character. That's got nothing to do with Lord Henry or Basil. It was there before Lord Henry and Basil. So, I do believe that Dorian is naturally, or the way he's been brought up, self-centered and vain and egotistical and cruel. Then he rose from the table, lit a cigarette, which is probably what Lord Henry has taught him to do, and flung himself down on a luxuriously cushioned couch. So he's not bothered at all about the events of the previous evening. Page 111, the thing had to be examined. He's distancing himself from the portrait. He's removing the fact that it's his soul. Then he doesn't have to worry or think about it much. And he refers to it as the thing. He locked both the doors because now he needs to see if the change really did happen or if he imagined it. And he saw it there. It was perfectly true. The portrait had altered. Could it be that what the soul thought the chemical atoms realize, because Dorian thinks to himself, is it like the paint or the matter that this portrait is made up of has changed based on what the soul thinks. He had made him conscious how unjust, how cruel he had been to Sibyl Vane. Should be capitalized. It was not too late to make reparations for that. I've put that in pink because, yes, it is. Sibyl's dead already. How did Sibyl die? What happened was her mother came to fetch her or something from the theatre, and it was about 12:30 after midnight, and Sibyl said that she'd forgotten something upstairs, and she went back into the theatre, and then she never came out again. And when they discovered her body, she had obviously consumed some prussic acid or something containing lead, some poisonous material that was obviously deliberate because she killed herself on purpose. But Lord Henry says that the press must make it seem like it was an accident, although Lord Henry believes it was definitely not an accident. Because how do you accidentally swallow something like that? That's poisonous. Anyway, it made him conscious of how unjust he had been, right? So he realizes he was cruel. The portrait would be a guide to him through life, would be to him what holiness is to some, and conscience is to others, and fear of God to us all. That we can understand, the holiness, doing sinful things in the name of God or some other religion, or your conscience, you knowing that what you've done is wrong. Page 112, but here was a visible symbol of the degradation of sin. That portrait, that is what the portrait is. And we've spoken about this in the last video. A physical representation of his soul, but the degradation, the degrading, the wearing down, the destruction that brings about being sinful. So your soul degrading and being destroyed because of committing sinful acts. Page 112. Finally, Dorian went over to the table and wrote a passionate letter to the girl he had loved, imploring her forgiveness, accusing himself of madness. So when he suddenly realizes, I actually was very cruel to Sibyl, then he goes off to a desk and writes this long letter about how sorry he is and I don't know what came over him, and he just lost it and he went mad and all that. Remember, before he went to bed in the last chapter, he said that he would make amends with Sibyl and marry her and try and love her again. We discussed that. Lord Henry arrives. He's knocking and he says, Dorian, I have to speak to you urgently. Lord Henry knows that Sibyl is dead, right? He assumes that Dorian knows too. He doesn't realize that Dorian hasn't read the letter he wrote to him and that he's been sleeping all morning and hasn't seen the paper. Okay? So Lord Henry's come to check on Dorian because he thinks Dorian's going to be devastated. I'm so sorry for it all, Dorian, but you must not think too much about it. It was not your fault. All right? Dorian is like, what are you talking about, Sibyl Vane? Yes, I'm talking about Sibyl Vane. But now Dorian just thinks, oh, you mean the fight that I had with her. Lord Henry asks him, did you make a scene with her? Did you cause trouble? Did you have an argument? And very interestingly, page 113, Dorian says, I was brutal, Harry, perfectly brutal. Perfect. What do you mean you were brutal, but it was perfect? It's almost as if Dorian is proud of himself, and that's really what conceited means. You're so absorbed with your own self and proud of what you've done. And it's almost as if Dorian, now watching all these plays on stage, felt like the way he acted so angrily, would have been perfect had he been on stage doing it. But it is all right now, says Dorian. Yeah, little does he know. I am not sorry for anything that has happened. Wow, that is selfish. Hey? Imagine not being sorry for how you've treated Sibyl. It has taught me to know myself better, and there's the individualism which Lord Henry promotes so much, and it all being about you experiencing pleasure, you experiencing new sensations, you learning about yourself, you having a good life. That's what it's all about. Page 113 as well, Dorian says, I know what conscience is. It is not what you told me it was, Harry. I want to be good. I can't bear the idea of my soul being hideous. Now, to Lord Henry, he thinks, oh, well, that's ridiculous. but his soul, as in what you and I understand as soul, conscience. Dorian could be meaning that, but there's a double meaning there. He could also be meaning the physical painting, because when he looked at it at the end of chapter 7, he said, "Oh, how horrible," and then he drew a screen in front of it because he didn't want to see it. He can't bear to see it looking so hideous. Do you really think that Dorian is going to be able to say, "Right, I'm not speaking to you anymore, Lord Henry, I'm not doing anything sinful"? No, it's not. Lord Henry says, "Well, didn't you get my letter?" Dorian says, "I was afraid there might be something in it that I wouldn't like." So there's again that insight. You know that Lord Henry is cynical. You cut life to pieces with your epigrams. Yes, Lord Henry does. Lord Henry says, "Well, my letter, but don't be frightened, was to tell you that Sibyl Vane is dead." So Dorian discovers she's dead. And then Dorian gives out a shriek and he's, "No, don't lie to me. You don't say stuff like that. It can't be true. Why would you say that?" Anyway, Lord Henry says, "Well, she had swallowed something by mistake." And as I mentioned earlier, how do you swallow something by mistake? Some dreadful thing they use at theatres. It had either prussic acid or white lead in it. She committed suicide. But look how casual Lord Henry is about it all. She had swallowed something by mistake, some dreadful thing, I don't know, it was either this or that. He carries on and saying, "You mustn't let this thing get on your nerves. You must come and dine with me, and afterwards we will look in at the opera. Your fiancée has just killed herself because of you, Dorian," right? And Lord Henry's attitude is, well, you mustn't let this thing, as if it's nothing, get on your nerves, upset you, or think about it too much. So there we can see, wow, that is negative influence from Lord Henry. That is what Dorian is going to adopt, and no wonder Dorian is going to be acting the way he has been acting, but also is going to be acting the way he is going to act, as we'll see. Dorian says on page 115, "So I have murdered Sibyl Vane, like I may as well have cut a little throat open. Yet the roses are not less lovely, and the birds sing just as happily." How extraordinarily dramatic life is. So Dorian adopting Lord Henry's idea of, don't let it get to you, only think of things that bring you pleasure, have a hedonistic viewpoint on life. Don't think of anything that's unbecoming and, it's going to make you feel bad. So Dorian's like, well, I may have killed her, but, the roses still look good and the birds are still singing. So, you know what? It's just one crazy experience. How strange life is. Can be so over the top sometimes. He even goes on to say, if I had read all this in a book, I think I would have wept over it. What? So if you had read it in a book, which is fiction, maybe, you would have cried. But luckily this is just real life, so it's not dramatic at all. You see how warped Dorian's mind is. And then we can link that to the fact that, well, remember his relationship with Sibyl Vane was purely art, because it was all about her acting on stage. And so to him it wasn't real life anyway. Then he says, wow, strange that my first passionate love letter should have been addressed to a dead girl. A dead girl. It's just like no compassion, no remorse, no clear love for Sibyl, because that's over now, So was it true love? Well, definitely not then. Dorian says, she explained it all to me, why she acted so badly. It was terribly pathetic. Wow. But I was not moved a bit. So it's almost like psychopath, He's almost, it's like a psychopath. I thought her shallow. Wow, there she is, devastated, pouring her soul out to you, trying to explain, completely head over heels for you, and you think she's shallow. Meantime, Dorian is the one that's shallow. She had no right to kill herself, says Dorian. It was selfish of her. There's individuality again. There's the egotistic nature, being self-centered. I've now suffered, according to Dorian, because she's killed herself. She had no right to do that. Or how about you had no right to speak to her the way you did? This is not make-believe, Dorian. This is not play time. This is somebody's real life. This is a person who has died. Page 116, Dorian says, it's not my fault that this terrible tragedy has prevented my doing what was right. So I would have done the right thing by apologizing, giving her this letter, and going up to her and saying I'm sorry and marrying her again, all that. I would have done the right thing. Her death is not my fault. Dorian says, I'm glad you don't think I'm heartless, Lord Henry. I am nothing of the kind. Actually, you are. And yet I must admit that this thing again, which I've underlined, dissociation from it, as if it's nothing that has happened, does not affect me as it should. Dorian doesn't understand, why do I not feel as sad and upset as I should? It seems to me to be simply like a wonderful ending to a wonderful play. Linking back to all the plays that he's been watching, and the fact that Sibyl really was just a character all the time and never actually Sibyl Vane, as Lord Henry asked him once, when is she actually Sibyl Vane? And he says never. And so Dorian is imagining that this experience that he's had with, getting engaged to somebody and then breaking up with her and then her killing herself because of you is almost like a story. It's just like a play. It's fiction, and if you were to watch such a play on stage, you would think it would be a wonderful play, very well written, very exciting, very dramatic, and how wonderful it is that this person killed herself because of you. It's almost it's almost got like a Romeo and Juliet feel to it, which is ironic because, well, they were watching Romeo and Juliet. Page 117, Lord Henry says, one should absorb the colour of life, but one should never remember its details. Details are always vulgar. Hedonism, there it is, hedonistic viewpoint of life. When you think about the details of things, you could get upset, or it could irritate you, or create any negative, unbecoming emotion. And so therefore, you must just absorb the colour of life, just appreciate the good and the experience. Page 118, Lord Henry continues by saying, the one charm of the past is that it is in the past. Now you and I can say, yeah, well, that is true. But at the same time, you can't just say, no matter what you've done, oh, well, it's in the past now, so just moving on, no problem. There is something to me quite beautiful about a death, says Lord Henry. So he and Dorian are thinking the same way, that it's all about a wonderful experience. How can you refer to somebody's suicide as beautiful, though? Page 119, unless, of course, you're associating with art, and then it's just an art form, so you can think what you like. Page 119, Lord Henry says, women appreciate cruelty, downright cruelty. Oh, really? I don't think that's true, but that's maybe what he thinks. That's why he treats his wife Victoria the way he does. More than anything else, I'm sure you were splendid. In other words, Lord Henry is saying, I've never seen you angry before, Dorian, but I'm sure that when you got angry and you insulted Sibyl, you did a great job. I'm sure it was beautiful to watch. And then he goes on to say, well, the girl never really lived, and so she has never really died. And you think, what does that mean? What it means is that because Sibyl was always acting as someone else in some fantasy world, she was never truly herself, and so therefore she didn't actually know what life is. Because the moment she did know what love was, she couldn't act anymore. So Dorian almost shouldn't feel guilty at all. He has no need to feel guilty because Sibyl was never real or alive, so she couldn't die. Right? Page 120, Dorian says, you have explained me to myself, Harry. Dorian feels so much better. But we will not talk again of what has happened. It's over now. It has been a marvelous experience. Always look at the diction in what Oscar Wilde says here, especially the adjectives. That is all. And that line, that is all, is said quite a few times too. When you say, oh, well, that is all, it means it's minuscule, there's nothing to it. It's over. I wonder if life has still in store for me anything as marvelous. Dorian has shifted his viewpoint, because of Lord Henry mostly, to thinking that Sibyl's death and the whole experience of her suicide and all that has been a wonderful experience, and he wonders if he has anything more coming his way that is that wonderful. And of course, Lord Henry says, oh yes, life is filled with marvelous experiences for you. Page 121. As soon as Lord Henry had left, Dorian rushed to the screen and drew it back, because now he wants to see, has the painting altered? No, there was no further change in the picture. It had received the news of Sibyl Vane's death before he had known of it himself. And that's why when he first looked at it, the marred mouth was not because he had spoken badly to Sibyl, it was because she was already dead by that stage. It was conscious of the events of life as they occurred. He would not think any more of what she had made him go through, as if he is the one that has suffered, not her. Meantime, she's dead. And what did you actually suffer, Dorian? Very important, because I put it in red. Page 121. Eternal youth, infinite passion, pleasures subtle and secret, wild joys and wilder sins. Dorian was to have all these things. The portrait was to bear the burden of his shame. That was all. Okay? So in the red there, this is the moment. Actually, Sibyl's death is the reason why Dorian believes now that he can live life however he wants. He has to take no responsibility whatsoever, because the painting will absorb it, all the shame, and act as his consciousness, as his soul. Okay? So when he discovers after that Sibyl has killed herself and that the portrait has changed, that is the defining moment that drives the rest of the plot forward, because Dorian now knows he can get away with anything, and that wish has in fact come true. All right. Page 122. If the picture was to alter, it was to alter. That was all. Who cares? You know, he thinks to himself, well, if the painting changes, it changes. What he should be thinking is, that's my soul getting uglier and uglier. Why inquire too closely into it? Don't even think about it, you know, for there would be a real pleasure in watching it. We've almost got this sadist sort of, I don't know how to explain it, but it's almost evil in that Dorian's gaining pleasure from seeing his soul become uglier and grotesque. It's almost as if, let me do this sinful act, and then I can go home and see how did the portrait change in response to what I've done. He would be able to follow his mind into secret places, as it had revealed to him his own body, the painting, so it would reveal to him his own soul. So when he saw the painting for the first time, remember he said in Basil's studio, wow, do I really look like that? Like I've never actually realized how attractive, how handsome I am before. So yes, the painting revealed his own body, but now it's revealing his own soul. But at this point in the novel, no one but Dorian knows that this painting has changed or has the ability to do what it does. Okay. Page 123. What did it matter what happened to the painting? He would be safe. I'm safe, says Dorian. So why should I worry? But he drew the screen back in front of the picture because, well, I mean, I don't want to see it, you know. I don't want to see it. I don't want to see my soul getting ugly. Even though he's spoken about he is going to have a pleasure in watching it, it's still something that he doesn't want to stare at all the time, because that might make him feel a bit of remorse, or it's just not nice. It's just not pleasing to the eye. So you don't want to, view something that's ugly that's going to make you feel any negative emotions. So, I mean, I don't want to see it. So he puts a screen in front of it. But also, he doesn't want anybody else to see it either. He doesn't want Victor to see it, you know. So, and so much so that you'll see in the chapters that follow that he's actually going to have that painting put up in an upper room and locked away so that nobody can see it ever, right? Although somebody does see it, and at the end of the novel, lots of people see it, but it's not what we think it is. Okay, but anyway, later, about that later. And you and I can say, well, unfortunately, that doesn't work for us. We don't have a physical representation of our soul that we can just put behind a screen and then carry on with life. And it's a good thing, too. You know, we do have a conscience, and it stops us from doing terrible things, or it makes us apologize or try and make amends when we do wrong, so that we try and live a life that is, as good as possible, so that we can be good people. That's really what it's all about. But for Dorian, well, he has a plan. He has a portrait to do all that job for him, so he doesn't have to feel anything. But we'll actually see later on in the novel that he can't run away from his conscience.